Hi, my name's Stuart Ascott. I'm a chef manager at Edmonds at West Suffolk College. I'm just going to make some bread with you today. Just to show you a few techniques for making bread, and also to help cut the boredom for you, and even for myself to do something a little bit different after looking after the kids all day. So today I was going to show you how to make a type of bread. It's known as pan rustic. I make it a lot at Edmonds West Suffolk College. Now what I'm going to be showing you over the next few lessons, I'm going to do one or two of these posts, trying different recipes just to show you some different techniques for making bread. By doing this, you'll also see that it will have longer life, because generally the problem is when you make some bread, it's lovely when you eat it warm and fresh, and by the next day it's like a brick. So today I'm going to show you a few artisan techniques which are going to help you keep a nice fresh loaf for a couple of days without using all the artificial dough conditioners that places like Tesco's and other bread manufacturers use. So today I'm just going to show you how to make the pan rustic. Also, if you need any recipes, my email is stuart.ascott@westsuffolkcollege.ac.uk. I'll put my card up at the end as well, and then just so you can remember, or take a picture of it on your phone, and you can get any of the recipes you need. Anything that you want to make over this time you don't have a recipe for, you can email me and I can send you the recipe. Like I say, we're probably going to also post a few recipes and things like that onto the Edmonds Facebook page. Okay, so just to start, this is a real simple basic bit to start with. I've got 250 grams of bread flour. I've got half a gram of fresh yeast. The half gram of fresh yeast I'm now going to put into the 250 grams of water I've got there as well. So equal quantity of bread flour and water, so 250 flour, 250 water, a half gram of fresh yeast, and I'm just going to put that into the water. Now the water is room temperature. I don't want it too hot, I don't want it to kill the yeast. I don't want the yeast to be too active, but I don't want it to be cold so it's too dormant either. What I want to do is just slowly let the yeast feed on this bit of flour overnight so it gets really strong. And what that's going to do, it's going to produce bigger air bubbles. We're going to get a better rise from our bread, and then on top of that we're also going to create a culture with that bread where it's going to get an acidic culture, and that's going to help stop the spoilage bacteria from making our bread really hard. So really simple. I've just let that yeast dissolve. I'm now going to pour that on top, and I'm just going to mix it together with my fingers. Now it's 7:30 now at night, and what I'm going to do is probably at about 9 o'clock tomorrow, so between 12 and 14 hours, I'm going to just let this prove and ferment overnight, and then tomorrow I'm going to make my final bread. So it should be quite wet. You should see it's quite liquid, but the most important thing what you just need to do is make sure that all the dried flour has gone. You don't want any dried flour mixing unmixed at the bottom of the bowl. Otherwise what will happen is, flour's a funny old thing, and what it'll do is it will kind of go hard, and if that goes through your final dough, it'll be quite unpleasant to eat. Have like little lumps in it. Okay, so I've just mixed that together. It's just a nice temperature, about 21 degrees is perfect. Just rinse my hand, and now I'm going to cover this, and I'm going to leave it that for 12 to 14 hours, just on the side here. Now tomorrow, when it comes to final mixing, I can either add wholemeal flour or white flour. I'll give you both recipes, and so I can decide whether I want a white or a wholemeal, and we'll go from there. Good morning. So now it's 8:30. The pre-ferment's been going for about 13 hours. I call it a pre-ferment. It's actually a Polish. That's a French technique where it's equal flour and water. So 250 flour, 250 water. When I open it, it's got a lovely bready smell. Smells of alcohol. It's producing the alcohol as it ferments. And as you can see, It's really bubbly, wobbly, but it's also slightly domed in the middle. That means it's really what I call ripe. Okay, so I've got that there. I've now got my 250 grams of white bread flour. I've decided to do white. I've now also got 5.6 grams of salt, and I'm just about to weigh out my 8 grams of yeast. I'm using fresh yeast. You can use instant dried, if you want fresh yeast, you can get it from Tesco's or Sainsbury's. And what I generally do is I actually break it up into little bits and then freeze it down. Like that, fresh yeast doesn't last as long as dried, but by freezing it down, it keeps for a lot longer. The only thing is make sure you break it into lots of little bits so that then you can get out the amount that you need. Otherwise, you'll find that you'll have a lot of trouble trying to get what you do need. Okay, so I'm just about there. What I will say as well, don't then defrost, take the yeast out, leave it in the fridge, you'll end up with a puddle. It obviously loses its structure from freezing. So I've now got my yeast ready, and now I'm going to weigh out my 85 grams of water ready to go. So I've got 85 grams of water, 85 grams of water, 8 grams of yeast, 5.6 grams of salt. I've got my 500 gram Polish and my 250 bread flour. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to put my yeast into my water, so room temperature water, and I'm just going to let that dissolve first so I don't have frozen lumps in my bread. It's going to make it really hard to mix. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my salt into my flour, and I'm going to put it in one side of my bowl. I always keep the salt away from where I'm going to put the yeast or the pre-ferment. Salt eventually can kill yeast, but generally it's not going to kill the yeast. What it's going to do is going to retard it, slow down the proving process, make your bread prove a lot slower. So just always try and keep the two separate. So I'm going to just empty the Polish in there, and if you can see, it's really stringy, it's bubbly. And what's happened is because we've allowed that to ferment overnight, the flour's got really hydrated. And when you start to learn more about bread, what you'll actually learn is that bread isn't about needing to develop gluten, it's actually about hydration of the flour. So because we're using this technique, the flour's got really well hydrated, and because of that, hopefully for my arm this morning, the bread's going to come together a lot quicker because the flour's been allowed to hydrate. So I'm just going to take off the excess Polish off of there. Just going to mix this together, make sure all the yeast is dissolved, because otherwise, like I say, I'll have lumps in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to knead it for just a few minutes. It shouldn't need much more than that, because afterwards what I'm going to show you is about folding. We're going to fold the bread in the proving process, and that's going to help to develop the gluten. After that, we're also going to pre-shape the bread before we give it its final shape. All of this helps to develop the gluten. It saves us having to knead it quite so much, which what I'm trying to do is show you easier ways to make bread at home if you don't have the luxury of a big mixer like me. And also bread that will last, you know, like as I've said yesterday, that you don't have to worry about making it and then by the end of the day it's gone. But as we all know, if we make a good bread anyway, it won't last till the end of the day. Okay, so I've now got all of my ingredients in there. Okay, so I've got my Polish, I've got my flour, my salt, my yeast, my water. I'm just going to bring it together with my hand. So what I'm going to do, bring it together, and then in a moment, once it's stopped being wet and gooey, quite as sticky, all the dry flour is gone, I'm going to put it onto the bench just with a little bit of oil. You can, I've got some spray oil, but you can use, you can just put a bit of vegetable oil on your bench. Don't want to use any extra flour. When you start learning about bread, it's all about, you'll learn it's all about percentages, it's all about how wet the bread is. And you don't want to add any extra flour to the recipe than what's already in there, because otherwise you'll make the final bread will be really dry. What you want to do, if your bread is sticky, it's all about kneading it and getting that gluten formation. And so you have a nice well-shaped bread. You don't want to keep adding more and more flour. So it's getting there, it's slowly getting there. Keep opening it up, turning it over, getting as much flour in the dry flour in with that wet dough. And what I always teach my students as well, I always try and do it with one hand. One thing my partner really hates is when I make bread, there is dough everywhere. So it's all over the taps. The one she really hates is over the sponge where I'm washing it off of all the equipment. I usually have to tell her to put it to one side, and I'll use it for the rest of the day for all my bread making. Otherwise I go through a lot of sponges. But yeah, so keep your hand clean. So if you're having to grab anything else, it just means that you can grab it without leaving a trail everywhere. So I've got to that point where the whole lot is come together, and now I'm just going to knead it for a few minutes. I should have taken that off in my preparation. A little bit of flour there, and all I'm going to do, I'm just going to put that on there and just knead it for 2 or 3 minutes. What I want to do is start making the dough look smooth. At the moment, it's what we call a shaggy mess. So it looks really rough. It's obviously really sticky. Try not to worry about it stuck over your hands. It will start to come off. And it will start coming away from the bench if it's sticking to the bench. But as you can see already, it's not too sticky. It's helped that I put that little bit of oil onto the bench. But all I'm looking for the gluten to start to develop. I'm not looking for full development. Not like sometimes when I'm teaching the students, we've got it in the machine. We look for the dough to look really smooth. We look for it to be shiny and it start to stick to the dough hook. I'm not going as far as that. It should look smooth. Should be starting to come together, but we're going to continue to develop that gluten through our folding process and our shaping. It's already starting to come together. It hasn't taken much, just because we've had that pre-ferment overnight, and as I said, we've let that flour hydrate. I'll show you some other, I'm going to do some other videos, and we'll do some different techniques. I'll show you, I won't complicate it today. I'm just doing a simple bread recipe that you can see is quite easy to make. Takes very little time and gets you a really good result and a nice fresh bread. I've made some homemade soup today, or yesterday, and so I'll be eating that for lunch today, and I'll be having a nice bit of fresh bread with it. Okay, so it's starting to come together. I can see it's starting to look a little bit smoother, and because of the gluten is a protein, and as it activates, what it will do is it will want to stick together. And so it will come away from the bench and hopefully come off of your fingers as well. So we're getting there. So what I'm going to do, I've got another bowl here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to spray oil the bowl. And I'm going to leave it in there to prove. But before we do that, what I do want to show you, because we're just about there, I do want to show you how we're going to do the folds rather than me keep clipping the video. So I'll get my dough scraper and take off the other excess dough off my fingers. Okay, so what I'm going to do, keep hold of the dough scraper, so I'll show you how we're going to do the folds. So just going to give it a bit more spray, it'll stop it sticking. So all I've done is I've stretched my dough out and I'm folding it over to the middle. I'm folding it over to the middle. Here's my dough scraper, scrape it off the bench, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it over again from that side. So I've turned it and then folded it over. So I've given that a quick fold. I'm just going to show you that again just so you can see. So I'm going to just stretch the dough out, and it's already getting tighter, and the reason it's getting tighter is because I've folded it and I've activated the gluten. I'm building up the gluten structure of the bread. So into the middle, it's what we call, if we were doing puff pastry, a letter fold. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is stretch out from that side and fold it over. Okay, as you can see, it wants to hold its shape, and that's because we've got that gluten structure. Now I'm going to stretch it out the other way. Okay, and now I'm going to fold that in to the middle. And that over to the middle as well. Okay, like that. So, I'll spray oil the bowl. Now I want you to do, I've just done two folds there. So I've stretched it out, folded it to the middle, turned, stretched it out, folded it again. That's one fold. So I want you to do that after 25 minutes, and then we're going to do that after 50 minutes. The full proof, what we call the bulk fermentation time, is 70 minutes. So we're going to prove this in total for 70 minutes. So spray oil the bowl, I put the dough in there, and I'm going to cling film it, and I'm going to leave it for 25 minutes. We'll do the fold, another 25 minutes I fold, and then after 70 we're going to start looking at shaping. Alright, so I've had now 70 minutes of proving. I've folded it at 25 minutes, I folded it at 50 minutes, and now it's just ready to start the shaping. As you can see, it's proved up lovely. It should look nice and light, and the dough has become really smooth. Even after the first set of folds, you should notice that the bread, instead of looking rough, it was starting to look smooth as a dough. So I'm just going to put this onto the bench. And every time then you're folding it, you noticed it get tighter again, holding its shape. You can see it holds its shape fairly well. So I'm just going to spray oil the dough. It's just going to help me to stop it sticking. I've already spray oiled the bench. And what I want to do now, I'll use my dough scraper and make sure it's not stuck. I'm going to just do some more folds. The reason being, by doing this, I'm going to build the structure of the dough. It's going to help hold its shape. So all I did is I folded it together. And now what I'm doing is I'm just bringing all the sides up to pinch all the seams together. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave that there just to rest now for another 5-8 minutes or so. Cover it over, make sure it doesn't dry out. We don't want it to form a skin or anything like that. So just another 5-8 minutes. You can see just by doing the folds, it's helping it to hold its shape. But we're just, again, building the structure of the gluten in the loaf, ready for the final prove, which will be in about another 5-8 minutes. Okay, so now I've let that rest for about 8 minutes after the pre-shaping, and I've just let it rest because what would have happened is that just by pre-shaping it, it's got tight, then it gets unworkable, and it just needs to rest again a little bit before we give it its final shape. So I've now got that into I've turned it upside down to where the seam was. I've got that in a nice rectangle. I'm not going to do too much to it. I don't want to start squeezing and prodding it. What I find is with students is if I ask them to put the dough onto the bench, once it's had its proof, they start throwing in loads more flour and they start kneading it about, and it's like, what you're doing, you don't need to knead it anymore. You've already done the kneading process. You're just shaping it now. And knocking back, I don't always like that expression. What you're trying to do is taking it out of the bowl by trying to keep as much of that air in it as possible. The folding and the shaping is just for that. It's just to get it into the shape of the bread that you want. You don't want to expel any more air than you need to, and you're just helping to fold, to build the structure, the shape of the actual loaf. Okay, so just from here, I'm just going to just push it out just gently. I don't want to really slam it, as I said. I don't want to knock too much air out of it. I'm going to keep this as a rectangular loaf, so all I'm going to do is I'm just going to fold it over to the middle, and then I'm just going to push those seams down into the loaf. I'm going to roll that over again. Again, push that down with your thumbs. You can use your palms if you want. You can see how it's been folded over. So I've got the seam in here, and now I'm going to just lift this up and pull this across, and I'm just going to now pinch. So this is going to look like a big Cornish pasty. So as you can see, I've got my seams there, and it looks just like I say, like a big Cornish pasty. And I've just pinched all those seams together so it doesn't come undone. Okay, as you can see the seam, you can see the line on the top. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to lift it. I'm going to roll it over because I want the seam on the bottom. I'm going to put it on diagonal on the tray. I'll just show you how that looks now. I'm just going to flatten up those edges a little bit. I always say sometimes the students, they put it on and it's all skinny in places and thicker in others, and it's a dough. It means that you can pick it up and shape it how you want at this point. You can manipulate it how you want. You should be in control. Okay, so I've got a nice shape to that. Now what I want to do is I want to dust it with flour. It's up to you how you want to finish it. I've got semolina here. I've also got bread flour. I think for this I'm just going to use some bread flour. So good generous amount. So what I say about when we flour bread and when we slash bread, we'll always flour the bread before we slash the dough. The same as if we were making pastry. If we were egg washing the pastry, we'd always egg wash before we slashed it, because otherwise all you do is you make the slashes, then when you put the egg wash over you can't see where you slashed it. Okay, the same with the bread flour. So we're going to flour it, and then what I'm going to do just before I bake it in the oven, I'm going to slash it. So the flour will help to keep stop the skin from forming on the outside of the bread. While it's on its final proof, so I'm going to prove it at the moment. It's proving quite quickly. I've got a good temperature on the dough, so I'm going to prove it now for 25 minutes. In about 15 minutes, I'm going to start get my oven on so it's nice and hot ready. I've got a nice big tray. I've got the kettle filled ready to boil up some water. I'm going to put some steam in the bottom of the tray. So just a little explanation about the bread. The bread will form a skin, okay? It's a natural part of it, and that's why when we're trying to prove things, we're trying to put cling film over cling film over. So, okay, so explanation continues. So the bread eventually will form a skin. You're trying to stop that by keeping the bread cling film. Sometimes if you put it in a prover, it'll have moisture in there to stop it forming a skin. And of course, in the oven, it will form a skin, which eventually turns into the crust. When you're proving bread, 2/3 of the proof is in your prover or in your bowl, and the final third of the proof is in the oven, okay? We call that oven spring. But for that proof, we want that bread to grow. So what we do is we put moisture in the oven, and that will help the bread to grow. Eventually, the bread will want to grow through the skin or the crust, and that's why we slash the bread, so we control where it's going to grow from. So just before cooking, I'm going to do a nice big deep slash down the middle. It all depends on the style of bread you're making, but with this, just a nice big slice down the middle, and then that will help it to grow up. I'm going to start the oven on a high temperature. I'm going to start it on about 220, just for about 5 minutes, and then I just reduce the oven down. I'll finish it for another 15 to 20. That's completely up to you how long you cook it for. You can cook it for a bit longer if you like more crust on the bread. I like this loaf to come out quite soft, so I cook it for just enough time that it cooks the dough. Okay. So here we are at the final stage, about to bake. I've just boiled the kettle. I'm just going to put some steam or some water in the tray to produce some steam. Steam would be really important to provide moisture around the bread to help it grow, stop it browning too quickly. I've got the oven on 220 degrees, and as you can imagine, that could burn quite quickly. So if you don't have a razor, the best thing is a sharp serrated knife. I've still got the flour, as you can see, across the top of the loaf, and all I'm going to do is quickly, very, very quickly, slash across the top of the dough. Nice big cut, as you can see, and now that's going to go straight in the oven. So I'll put it on for 5 minutes to start. After that 5 minutes, I'll turn it down to 180, and I'll do it for another 15 to 20 minutes, probably 15 minutes, maybe 20. We'll just look at it. It's a different oven from what I'd obviously use at work, a home oven. So sometimes different ovens will work at different times. So you have to adjust to that. Okay. So I'm just about to take the bread out of the oven. Let's mind out for the steam first. Out the loaf comes. Now, I quite like quite a soft white loaf, but if you wanted more crust on this, you wanted the bread to be a bit crispier, what I'd do is I'd remove the steamer tray and then leave this loaf of bread in the oven for another 8-10 minutes, and then it will get crispier on the outside. So if you just take it out the oven, as I have now, you'll think, well, it is already really crisp. And of course it is, but the residual heat coming out of the loaf, steam coming out, will soften up that crust a little bit. Okay, so it looks delicious. It smells amazing. I'm only 40 minutes, because it's 20 past 11 now. I've only got 40 minutes till lunch, so I started baking this morning I started making the bread about 8:30 this morning. Now it's 20 past 11, let it rest, so it's just ready for lunchtime. Okay, so quick recap of what we've done so far. I did my polish last night, 250 grams of flour, 250 grams of water, 1/2 gram of yeast. I left it overnight, 13 hours in fact, and then this morning I mixed the Polish with the 250 grams of flour, 5.6 salt, 8 grams of fresh yeast, and then 85 grams of water. I kneaded it for 3 or 4 minutes, and then I put it in the bowl, let it proof for 70. At 25 minutes, I gave it a couple of folds. 50 minutes, I gave it a couple of folds as well. When I took it out, I pre-shaped it, folded it, and then left it for another 8 minutes just to relax. And then we did the final shape, and then I left it half an hour to for the final proof. And then I've put it in the oven. That's had 5 minutes at 220 degrees, and then it's had another 20 minutes at 180 degrees. That'll be cooked through, but even now it is still crisp, but with the moisture starting to come out the bread, it's softening up. Make sure though, when you cool it, you put it on a rack like this, because otherwise what's going to happen is when you if you leave it on a tray like that, what you're going to do is you're going to find that all the steam is coming out the bottom of the bread, and you'll have a soggy bottom. Okay, but I'll just do one last thing. In about another half an hour, I'll do the last video, just do the cutting through so you can see the texture of the bread. So now it's lunchtime, so I've let the bread rest. As you can see, I can just push my hands into it, softened up. Okay. And I'm just going to cut off a few slices just so you can see the size of the air bubbles that are inside. It's a lovely soft white loaf. As you can see, some nice aeration in the loaf, nice big air bubbles. It smells and it will taste absolutely delicious.